At her wedding, my daughter placed my picture by the entrance with a sign that read, "No admittance." It was a cruel gesture from my only child, the person who was meant to be my greatest pride. Instead of joining the celebration, I simply turned and walked away, leaving my dreams of a happy family behind. But 3 hours later, my phone lit up with 73 missed calls. Her betrayal had backfired, leading to complete chaos. Before we get into it, please subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments what time it is where you are. The harsh blue light of my phone cut through the soft glow of my reading lamp like a knife. It buzzed on the leather armrest, a violent and insistent vibration that shattered the calm February evening I had built around myself. The financial journal I was reading rustled as I reached for the phone, the screen's aggressive light reflecting off my glasses. "Dad!" Sarah's face filled the screen, her excitement so bright it seemed to radiate through the phone. "I have the most incredible news. I'm engaged." My coffee cup stopped halfway to my mouth. In the background, I could see what looked to be a high-end apartment with granite countertops and large windows showing off Seattle's glittering skyline and the Space Needle. "Sweetheart, I began, but she held her left hand up to the camera. The diamond on her finger caught the light, scattering tiny rainbows across her smiling face. "Look at this ring, Dad. Isn't it beautiful?" Before I could properly answer, a man's face appeared next to hers. He was tall with a sharp jaw and perfectly styled brown hair. His smile looked like it was made for a magazine ad. "Mr. Miller," he said, his voice carrying a smooth confidence that I'd learned to be wary of during my years as a financial advisor. "I'm Mark Peterson. I promise I'll make your daughter the happiest woman alive." "Dad, I'm so happy for you." "Tell me about Mark," I said, trying to sound as excited as they were while I studied the stranger who had won my daughter's heart. "He's a successful tech startup founder, Dad. He has such big plans." Sarah was practically bouncing with joy as she spoke. "Mark's portfolio includes AI development and some new app ventures," she went on. "The market has been a bit unpredictable lately," Mark interrupted smoothly, placing his hand on Sarah's shoulder. The gesture seemed more possessive than loving. "But I've diversified. Some hardware, some software, and a few traditional investments for stability." I noticed his eyes never quite met mine through the camera. They kept glancing at something off-screen, maybe another phone or a laptop. A high-end watch on his wrist caught the light, but the way he held his arm seemed deliberate, like he was putting on a show. "When's the wedding?" I asked. "April 15th, Sarah squealed. "I know it's fast, but Mark found this incredible venue that had a last-minute opening, the Four Seasons in Seattle. Can you believe it? 2 months. They were getting married in just 2 months. "That's very fast," I said carefully. Mark's smile tightened just a little. "When you know, sir. Besides, Sarah deserves the wedding of her dreams, and a venue like that doesn't stay available for long." Through the screen, I watched him twist a gold ring on his pinky finger, a nervous habit that didn't match his polished appearance. His other hand stayed firmly on Sarah's shoulder, his thumb rubbing small circles that seemed more controlling than comforting. "Mark has been so amazing with everything," Sarah said, leaning into him. "He's taking care of all the vendors and making all the arrangements. I don't have to worry about a thing." That should have made me happy. Instead, a cold feeling settled in my stomach. "Well, I can't wait to meet you in person, Mark," I said, forcing a warm tone into my voice. "Likewise, Mr. Miller. I've heard so much about you." After some more excited talk about flowers and music, they finally ended the call. I sat in my leather chair as the room grew dark, the phone screen fading to black in my hand. The financial journal lay forgotten on the floor, and my coffee was cold. Something about Mark bothered me, though I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Maybe it was how he controlled the conversation while pretending to be respectful, or how his expensive suit looked a little too perfect, like a costume he'd just put on. I stared at my reflection in the dark screen, my own doubts growing in the darkness. 13 restless nights had passed since that video call. When Mark called and asked for a man-to-man chat, I agreed, partly because I was curious, and partly because I needed to understand what was bothering me about him. The cafe he chose in Chicago's Gold Coast was exactly the kind of place I expected. Quiet luxury, marble tables, and the kind of privacy that comes with $40 entrees. I saw him in a corner booth, looking surprisingly nervous in his perfectly tailored gray suit. "Mr. Miller, thank you for coming," he said, standing to shake my hand. His grip was firm but a little sweaty. "Please sit. Can I get you something?" "Coffee is fine." I studied his face as we sat down. In person, his polished charm seemed thinner, like a cheap veneer over particle board. "How are the wedding plans going?" I asked. "Wonderfully, actually. That's part of why I wanted to talk to you." He fidgeted with his coffee cup, turning it exactly 90 degrees. "Can I trust you with something confidential?" The question hung in the air between us like a baited trap. "Of course," I said, even though every instinct told me not to. Mark leaned in, lowering his voice. "My investments are temporarily tied up because of some market shifts. It's nothing serious. A venture capital funding round for one of my startups is just delayed. It should clear up in 6 months." He paused and let out a sigh that sounded rehearsed. "But Sarah dreams of a fairy tale wedding, and I can't stand the thought of disappointing her." I watched his eyes as he talked. They were focused on a spot just over my shoulder, never quite looking at me. "The venue needs to be paid in full up front," he continued. "The flowers, the catering, all of it. It's more cash than I can access right now without taking a huge hit on my other assets." "How much do you need, Mark?" $50,000 would cover everything. I'll pay you back every penny by the end of the year, I promise. With interest, of course." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out what looked like official documents. "These show my startup's valuation. Over $2 million in assets, just temporarily inaccessible." The papers looked real, filled with official-looking stamps and legal jargon I didn't recognize, but the way he produced them so smoothly, like a magician pulling a card from his sleeve, made my skin crawl. "Mr. Miller, I know this is a lot to ask, but I love your daughter more than anything. I just want to give her the perfect start to our life together." He was good. I'll give him that. He seemed vulnerable. The documents looked convincing, and while $50,000 was a lot of money, it wouldn't ruin my retirement savings. "All right," I heard myself say, "but Sarah must never know about this." "Absolutely. It would crush her to think I couldn't provide for her." Relief washed over his face so quickly it almost looked real. "You have no idea how much this means to me, sir." I wrote the check slowly, my hand pausing over the signature line. Mark's eyes followed every movement of my pen like a hawk watching its prey. The moment I tore the check from the book, he practically reached across the table for it, folding it neatly into his wallet. "You won't regret this, Mr. Miller. Sarah is going to have the most beautiful wedding Seattle has ever seen." He left right after that, saying he had urgent calls to make to vendors. I sat alone in the expensive cafe, watching my coffee get cold as wealthy Chicagoans chatted around me about stock options and summer homes. My phone felt heavy in my pocket. I should have called Sarah, asked more questions about Mark's business, done the basic due diligence any rational person would do before handing over $50,000. Instead, I finished my coffee and went home, carrying the weight of a secret that already felt like a mistake. 6 days had passed since that meeting, and each one felt heavier than the last. I moved through my Chicago apartment like a ghost, the phone always within reach. Every room seemed to mock me. The clean kitchen where I barely ate, the living room where I couldn't focus on my book, the bedroom where I tossed and turned all night. My wife Helen's picture watched me from the nightstand, her kind smile a memory from better days. I picked up the silver frame and ran my thumb over the glass. "Helen always said the truth is more important than being comfortable," I whispered to her picture. She would have known what to do. Helen never trusted smooth talkers. She never let charm get in the way of her instincts. When Sarah was 16 and wanted to date a boy with a fast car, Helen had done a background check that would have made the CIA proud. But Helen was gone, and I was making decisions that felt like I was betraying everything she had taught me about protecting our daughter. The phone buzzed in my other hand. Sarah's picture smiled up at me. She had her mother's intuitive eyes, the same eyes that were now clouded by love for a man who might be a complete fraud. I dialed her number, then hung up before it rang. Then I immediately dialed again. "Dad, perfect timing. I just got back from the florist." How are the wedding preparations going? I tried to sound casual, but my voice was tight. Wonderful, Dad. Mark is so on top of every detail. He's handling the band, the photographer, even coordinating with the hotel. I barely have to do anything but show up in my dress. Every enthusiastic word was like a small twist of a knife. Mark was controlling every part of their wedding with her money. My money. Sarah, I started, then stopped. The promise I made to Mark felt like a gag. Are you sure you know him well enough? Of course, Dad. Why do you ask? Her tone changed, becoming a little defensive. I could hear her moving around her apartment, probably arranging flowers or looking at wedding magazines. Just a father's worry. You've only known him for a few months. 6 months, actually. And when you meet the right person, time doesn't really matter. She laughed, but it sounded forced. You taught me to trust my instincts, remember? Well, my instincts tell me Mark is perfect for me. Perfect. The word echoed in my head like an alarm bell. Nothing was perfect, especially not people who claimed to be. I'm sure you're right, sweetheart. I can't wait to dance with you at your wedding. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and pulled out the leather journal Helen had given me years ago. Most of the pages were still blank. I'd never been one for writing down my thoughts. Tonight was different. I needed to document this decision, this moment when I chose to trust Mark's promise over my own protective instincts. February 9th, 2025. Gave Mark $50,000 for wedding expenses. Sarah doesn't know. Something feels wrong. But I made a promise. Helen would say, I'm being a fool. But sometimes being a good father means trusting your daughter's choices, even when they scare you. I closed the journal and put it back in the drawer. Outside my window, Chicago was alive with the sounds of the evening. Couples walking home from dinner, families heading to the movies, the comfortable rhythm of normal people living their lives. For the first time in years, I envied them their simple problems. The wedding was 5 weeks away, 5 weeks for Mark to prove me wrong, or for me to find out just how badly I'd misjudged the man my daughter wanted to marry. I turned off the kitchen light and went to bed, taking Helen's picture with me. If I was making a mistake, at least I wouldn't be making it alone. 3 days had passed since I'd written those words in Helen's journal. Now I was standing outside Canlis, Seattle's temple of fine dining, watching through the large windows as Mark and Sarah laughed over glasses of champagne. The morning flight from O'Hare had left me tired and jet-lagged, but I had managed to shower and put on my best suit, a navy blue Hart-Schaffner Marks that suddenly felt inadequate under the restaurant's elegant chandeliers. Dad! Sarah rushed toward me in a flowing emerald dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. Her engagement ring sparkled as she hugged me, smelling of expensive perfume and pure joy. Mark stood up slowly from their corner table, his movements smooth and calculated. The charcoal gray suit he wore looked like it was straight out of a fashion magazine. My 50,000ers had been well spent. Mr. Miller, it's so wonderful to see you again. His handshake lasted a moment too long, his thumb pressing into my knuckles with a little too much force. Please sit. Mark gestured to the chair across from them, but he positioned himself to have the best view of the dining room. I took the liberty of ordering wine, a Chardonnay that pairs perfectly with their seafood. Before I could say anything, he was signaling the sommelier and launching into a long discussion about flavor profiles and aging that made me feel like an outsider in my own daughter's life. The menu changes with the seasons, Mark continued, not even bothering to hand me one of the leather-bound menus. But I recommend the halibut unless you prefer something more traditional. The word traditional was dripping with condescension. Dad's actually quite adventurous, Sarah said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. Remember that time you tried that Thai place in Lincoln Park? Mr. Miller, do you still get physical stock certificates? How quaint. Mark's smile never faded, but his eyes were cold. My jaw tightened. Sometimes the old ways are the best ways. Of course. Though I imagine it must be hard to track your portfolio without a digital app. He leaned back, draping his arm possessively around Sarah's shoulders. Sarah, your father probably remembers when Apple stock was just a few dollars a share, right, sir? Mark, maybe we should talk about something else, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Of course, my apologies. I forget that not everyone adapts to new realities so quickly. He turned to Sarah with a look of fake concern. Sweetheart, should we explain the basics of venture capital, or would that be too much? Sarah giggled, actually giggled, as if I were some doddering old man who needed to be protected from modern ideas. The waiter brought our first course, an intricate arrangement of oysters that Mark critiqued with surgical precision while explaining market trends to Sarah. Every few minutes, he'd toss a comment my way. You might find this interesting, Mr. Miller, before diving back into jargon designed to exclude me. Mark, you're so smart, Sarah said, looking at him with complete adoration. Dad, you're so lucky to have a son-in-law like him. When the bill came, Mark made a big show of pulling out a black credit card, waving away my attempt to contribute. Please, Mr. Miller, this is my treat after all. His eyes met mine with a cruel, calculated look. I can certainly afford it. Outside, I got into a taxi while Mark helped Sarah into his Porsche. Through the rear window, I watched him kiss her forehead tenderly, his laughter carrying on the evening air like a victory cry. My fists clenched in my lap as the city lights blurred past. Something was very, very wrong with Mark Peterson. Sleep was out of the question. I lay in my generic hotel bed until 11:30, replaying every smirk, every calculated insult, every moment Mark had made me feel small in front of my own daughter. Finally, I gave up and moved to the small desk, still in my wrinkled shirt and loosened tie. The hotel's Wi-Fi password was taped to the lamp. I opened my laptop and stared at the search bar, not sure where to start. Mark Peterson, I typed. The first page showed a LinkedIn profile and a few tech blog mentions, all matching his story. It was too perfect. I scrolled further, adding Seattle to the search. On page 3, I found something different, a business registration for Peterson Innovations, filed just 6 months ago. The address was a P.O. box. I tried Mark Peterson fraud. The screen flickered and then filled with court documents. King County Superior Court, case number CV 2024-5421. Mark James Peterson, defendant in a civil suit for misappropriation of funds, identity theft, and investment fraud. Investment fraud, I whispered to the empty room. My hands shook as I clicked through pages of legal documents. The plaintiff was a woman named Emily Davis, age 31, who had given Mark $180,000 for what she thought were investments in his tech startup. The photo showed a pretty woman with trusting eyes that looked a lot like Sarah's. I searched Mark Peterson Seattle victims. More cases appeared. Jessica Lee, $95,000. Megan Brown, $240,000. It was always the same pattern. Young, successful women. Always the same promises of a great investment opportunity. Always the same devastating financial loss. Mark Peterson accused of embezzling $200,000, I read from a news article, my voice cracking. But it was the photo gallery that made my blood run cold. Mark with Emily at what looked like an engagement party. Mark with Jessica at a romantic dinner. Mark with Megan, her left hand showing off a diamond ring identical to Sarah's. I spent the next 4 hours printing everything. Court filings, news articles, victim statements, police reports. The hotel's business center printer worked non-stop as I built a mountain of evidence. Each document revealed new horrors. Mark had used at least 3 different last names: Peterson, Morrison, and Richards. He specialized in finding women on dating apps, creating elaborate fake personas as a successful entrepreneur. The engagement phase always lasted exactly 6 months, just long enough to gain their trust and access their bank accounts. By 5 a.m., coffee cups littered the desk and my shirt was unbuttoned at the collar. The evidence covered every surface: photos of Mark's previous victims, screenshots of fake investment documents, testimonies from heartbroken families. My God, what is he doing to my daughter? The question hung in the stale hotel air. Outside, Seattle was waking up. Commuters were grabbing coffee, joggers were hitting the pavement, normal people living normal lives while my world was falling apart. I organized the documents into folders, one for each victim. Emily's folder was the thickest. She had fought Mark in court for 2 years before she ran out of money. Jessica had tried to warn other women online until Mark's lawyers threatened her into silence. Megan had simply vanished from social media altogether. The last document made me feel sick. It was a psychological profile from the FBI's white-collar crime unit. Mark showed classic narcissistic traits with sociopathic tendencies, with a particular talent for exploiting family bonds to achieve his financial goals. Dawn was breaking as I stacked the evidence in chronological order. My phone showed 6:47 a.m. Sarah would be getting ready for work soon, probably humming wedding songs while Mark watched from their bed, planning his next move. I reached for my phone, my hands steady now. The time for secrets was over. Valentine's Day morning was bright and sunny in Seattle. The irony was not lost on me as I laid out Mark's criminal history on the desk like cards in a high-stakes game. Each document told the same story: romance manipulation and financial ruin. I called Sarah's number at exactly 7:15 a.m., knowing she would be awake, but Mark might still be in the shower. She answered on the second ring, her voice full of the joy of a bride-to-be just 3 weeks from her wedding. "Morning, Dad. Did you sleep well? Wasn't dinner amazing?" The happiness in her voice made what I had to do even harder. "Sarah, I need to tell you something important. Are you sitting down?" "I'm getting ready for work, but what's wrong? You sound serious." I held Emily Davis's court filing in my hand, drawing strength from another father's failed attempt to save his daughter. "Sarah, Mark asked me for $50,000 for the wedding. You told me he was a millionaire." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "You're lying." "Mark would have told me." Her voice was shaking with disbelief. "Sweetheart, he said his assets were tied up and he needed money for the venue. He made me promise not to tell you." "That's impossible. Mark shows me his investment accounts all the time. He has over $2 million. He has a court case for fraud, sweetheart. I have the documents right here. King County, case number CV 2024-5421. He stole money from a woman named Emily Davis. I heard movement in the background, Mark's voice asking what was wrong. Sarah's breathing became quick and shallow. You're making this up because you can't accept that I'm grown up. You can't stand that I don't need you anymore. Sarah, please, just look at the evidence. There are other women. Jessica Lee, Megan Brown. He's done this before. It's the exact same pattern. The phone was suddenly snatched away. Mark's smooth voice replaced my daughter's tears. Mr. Miller, I understand your concern, but these accusations are completely false. I was cleared of all charges. The case is still pending, Mark. I have the current filings. You have outdated information from disgruntled former business partners. Sarah knows the truth about my finances. In the background, I could hear my daughter sobbing. Mark's voice became softer, more manipulative. Sweetheart, your father's trying to sabotage our happiness. Some parents just can't let go. Let me talk to Sarah, I said, my voice harder than I intended. She's too upset right now. These false accusations have really hurt her. Sarah's voice cut through, sharp with pain and anger. How could you do this to me? How could you lie about Mark just to ruin my wedding? I'm not lying. There are photos of him with other women, engagement rings identical to yours. Enough. You can't accept that I've found someone who loves me for who I am, not who you want me to be. I tried one last time, my voice breaking. Sarah, please, just look at the evidence before you marry him. I'm sending everything to your email right now. Don't come to my wedding. I'm serious. You've chosen to believe lies over your own daughter's happiness. The line went dead. I sat staring at my phone. The evidence was scattered around me like the wreckage of a 28-year relationship. Through the hotel window, couples walked hand in hand to Valentine's Day brunch, unaware of the war being fought in room 412. The email I had promised to send remained unsent, my finger hovering over the keyboard. Mark had won this round, turning my protection into persecution, my love into control. But fathers don't give up that easily. 1 month had passed since that Valentine's Day phone call, 31 days of wandering through my Chicago apartment like a ghost. The evidence folders sat on my kitchen table, their manila covers now warped from coffee rings and sleepless nights. Every morning was the same, checking my phone for messages that never came, staring at Sarah's picture until my eyes burned. The stack of unfinished letters on my desk grew thicker, apologies that started with "Dear Sarah" and ended as crumpled balls of paper in the trash. Helen's photograph watched me from the mantel as I pulled out Mark's court documents for the 100th time. Maybe I had been too harsh, too suspicious. The internet could be wrong, couldn't it? Photos could be faked, court records misinterpreted. Maybe I'm just being overprotective. She's a grown woman, I whispered to the empty room. My neighbors had started leaving worried voicemails. Mrs. Patterson from downstairs said I looked thin. The mailman asked if I was out of town, pointing to the pile of uncollected mail. Even my doctor's office called about a missed appointment I didn't remember making. But today was different. Today was April 14th, and tomorrow my daughter would marry Mark Peterson, with or without me. I picked up Helen's silver frame, tracing her smile with my thumb. "Helen, what would you do?" Her gentle eyes seemed to whisper what I already knew. Sometimes love means letting go. Maybe the court documents were fake. Maybe those other women had lied. Maybe Mark really did love Sarah, and my own jealousy had clouded my judgment. After all, what father easily gives his daughter away to another man? Maybe the articles are just slander, I murmured, finally closing the evidence folders. By noon, I had made my decision. I would go to the wedding, offer my blessing, and try to repair the damage my accusations had caused. The high-end jewelry store on Michigan Avenue welcomed me like an old friend. I'd bought Helen's engagement ring there 30 years ago. The wedding gift I chose cost more than most people's cars, a vintage Tiffany necklace with diamonds that sparkled like captured stars. The saleswoman wrapped it in a beautiful blue box with a card that simply read, "For my daughter on her wedding day, all my love, Dad." At O'Hare Airport, I sat with the gift on my lap, rehearsing the apology I had memorized on the way. I would tell Sarah I was wrong, that Mark seemed like a good man, and that all I wanted was her happiness. The plane took off into the evening sky, carrying me toward what I hoped would be a reconciliation. Below, Chicago's lights faded like dying embers, and I closed my eyes, imagining tomorrow's wedding as a new beginning instead of an end. Maybe a father could learn to trust his daughter's choices, even when they terrified him. The Four Seasons in Seattle rose before me like a wedding cake of glass and steel, its entrance draped in elegant banners announcing the Miller-Peterson celebration. I stepped out of the taxi, clutching Sarah's gift, my heart pounding as I adjusted my best navy suit, the same one I'd worn to her college graduation. Wedding guests streamed through the hotel entrance, a river of silk and laughter, their voices mixing with the soft notes of a string quartet warming up inside. I recognized a few faces, Sarah's college roommate, my brother Tom from Boston, neighbors from our old house in Lincoln Park. Then I saw it. My own face stared back at me from an ornate easel next to the entrance, blown up to poster size in black and white. Beneath my picture, elegant script spelled out words that felt like a punch to the gut. Entry forbidden. John Miller. By request of the bride and groom. The gift slipped from my suddenly numb fingers. Other guests slowed down, reading the sign with awkward curiosity before hurrying past. A few shot me sympathetic looks, recognizing the man in the photograph standing frozen on the sidewalk. "Excuse me, sir, but you're not on the list." A security guard appeared beside me, his voice professional but not unkind. His name tag read Davis. Maybe he had daughters too. This is my daughter's wedding." The words came out choked, barely audible over the hotel's ambient sounds. Davis shifted uncomfortably, his hand resting gently on my elbow. "I'm very sorry, sir, but I have clear instructions." The couple was very specific. Through the glass doors, I could see the reception hall being set up, white roses cascading from crystal vases, tables set with china that probably cost more than my monthly rent. My $50,000 at work, creating a beautiful scene I was forbidden to see. Other guests continued to flow around us like water around a rock, their conversations dropping to whispers as they passed the picture of the banished father. Some looked genuinely shocked. These were people who had known me for years, who had been to Sarah's birthday parties and graduation celebrations. I placed the Tiffany box carefully beside my own photograph, the bright blue silk, a stark contrast to the hotel's polished marble floor. The diamonds inside would look beautiful on Sarah's neck, if she ever chose to open it. Now I understand, Mark. Now I understand everything. Davis took a small step back, perhaps hearing something dangerous in my voice, but I wasn't angry anymore. Anger was too small for what I felt. This wasn't just rejection, it was a calculated humiliation, designed to strip me of any dignity I had left. Mark hadn't just won Sarah, he had made sure I would be publicly branded as the father too toxic to attend his own daughter's wedding. The photograph would make sure that everyone, friends, family, strangers, knew exactly how completely I had been cast out. I straightened my tie and nodded to Davis. "Could you call me a taxi, please? I need to get to the Bank of America downtown before they close." The security guard looked relieved. "Of course, sir. Right away." As I waited for the cab, I took one last look at my own face, staring back from that easel. The man in that photograph still believed his daughter might forgive him, might choose her family over a stranger's lies. That man had been a fool, but he knew better now. The taxi dropped me off outside the Bank of America branch in downtown Seattle at exactly 4:30 p.m. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the building's granite face. Inside, the Saturday skeleton crew moved with the slow efficiency of people counting down the minutes until closing time. I walked up to the customer service desk with the same calm focus I used to use when closing million-dollar deals. The young banker, whose name tag read Jessica, looked up from her computer with a polite smile. "Good afternoon. How can I help you today?" I placed my driver's license and account information on her polished counter. "I need to cancel a check immediately." Jessica's fingers flew across her keyboard, pulling up my account. "Certainly, sir. Can you give me the check number and the amount?" "Check number 2847 for $50,000, made out to Mark Peterson." I spelled the last name carefully, watching her type each letter. "Sir, if the check has already been deposited, this could cause problems for the recipient." Her voice was cautious, the tone of someone used to dealing with angry spouses in business disputes. I looked her straight in the eye. That's exactly what I'm hoping for. Understanding flickered across her face. She had seen this before: betrayed business partners, cheating spouses, family feuds that ended in financial warfare. She pulled out the official stop payment forms without another word. "There's a $35 processing fee, and the cancellation will be effective immediately in our system. Any attempt to cash or deposit this check will be declined." Perfect. I signed each form with the same careful signature I had used on Mark's original check. The irony was not lost on me. "The stop payment is now active, Mr. Miller. Here's your confirmation number and receipt." Jessica handed me the paperwork with the efficiency of someone who understood that financial revenge required proper documentation. I folded the receipt carefully and put it in my wallet, right next to the picture of Sarah from her college graduation. Somewhere across the city, Mark was probably finalizing the wedding details, confident that his vendors would be paid and his elaborate scam would end successfully. By now, the wedding ceremony had probably started. Sarah would be walking down the aisle in whatever dress Mark had convinced her to buy, surrounded by guests who had seen my face on that humiliating poster. The string quartet would be playing, the photographer capturing moments of joy and celebration. But in a few hours, when the caterers demanded payment and the florists wanted to settle their bills, Mark would find out that his main source of funding had vanished. The man who had made a living by manipulating other people's money was about to learn what it felt like when the game turned against him. "Will there be anything else today, Mr. Miller?" Jessica asked. "No, thank you. You've been extremely helpful." I walked out of the bank into the golden California afternoon, the confirmation receipt in my pocket like a loaded gun. Behind me, the electronic systems were already updating, marking check number 2847 as void, preparing to embarrass Mark in front of every vendor and guest at his stolen wedding. The taxi ride back to the airport was spent in satisfied silence. Sometimes the best revenge is simply pulling the foundation out from under someone else's lies. 2 hours had passed since I'd walked out of the Bank of America. And somewhere across Seattle, my daughter was probably having her first dance as Mrs. Mark Peterson. I sat in my hotel room, watching the city lights twinkle like scattered diamonds, my confirmation receipt folded neatly in my wallet. The Four Seasons ballroom would be glowing with candlelight right about now, the string quartet playing something classical while Sarah floated across the marble floor in whatever dress Mark had convinced her to buy. The thought should have made me sad. Instead, I felt a cold satisfaction. My phone buzzed, a text from my brother Tom. Beautiful ceremony. Wish you could have been here. Then another buzz. Payment terminals down. Very strange. This one was from a number I didn't recognize, probably a vendor. The third message made me smile. Mark looks like he's seen a ghost. At the Four Seasons, Mark would be talking to the catering manager about dinner service, pulling out the black credit card he had used so dramatically at our disastrous dinner. The same card that would now be declined with the harsh beep of insufficient funds. Mr. Peterson, we need immediate payment before we can serve the main course. The catering manager's voice would be professional but firm. I'd dealt with enough wedding vendors to know the drill. Mark would try again, probably blaming a technical glitch, asking them to run it manually. When that failed, he'd pull out other cards, each one maxed out from previous scams, each rejection echoing through the ballroom like a gunshot. There must be a mistake. This is impossible, he'd insist, sweat beading on his forehead despite the ballroom's perfect climate control. By now, the musicians would have stopped playing. Their payment had also been declined. The photographer would be packing up his expensive equipment, explaining that his contract required payment on the day of the event. Even the florist would be quietly removing the centerpieces, protecting her investment from a client who could no longer pay. Mark, what's happening? Why is everyone leaving? Sarah's voice would be filled with confusion and rising panic. Other guests would notice the chaos. Wealthy friends and family would be watching in horror as vendors systematically dismantled the elegant wedding they had been admiring just moments before. Social media posts would quickly shift from happy photos to awkward documentation of a very public financial meltdown. Your father, he did this. He ruined our wedding. Mark's voice would rise above the confused murmurs of the guests, his practiced charm finally cracking under the pressure. But I wasn't there to see his humiliation firsthand. I was 3,000 miles away, a cup of room service coffee growing cold on my nightstand, watching my phone light up with increasingly frantic calls from a number I recognized as Mark's. Call after call, each one more desperate than the last. I let them all go to voicemail. 73 missed calls. I counted them twice, watching the red notification bubble grow larger with each desperate attempt. Mark's number was most of them, but now Sarah's picture appeared between his calls, my daughter's bright smile flashing on the screen like a distress signal. The voicemails told the story I had set in motion but couldn't see for myself. Mark's first message, recorded at 7:15 p.m., still had a hint of his practiced confidence. Mr. Miller, there seems to be a technical issue with the banking systems. If you could call me back. By message 15, his composure was gone. Sir, I need you to contact the bank immediately. This is extremely urgent. Message 37 was pure panic. Please, Mr. Miller, the wedding is falling apart. There's been some terrible mistake. I poured myself a scotch from the hotel minibar and sat in the leather armchair by the window. Chicago's lights sparkled below, while across the country, Mark's carefully built world was crumbling in real time. The messages grew more and more desperate. The background noise revealed the chaos, vendors arguing, guests murmuring, the hollow sound of a ballroom being stripped of its magic. Mark's voice cracked as he begged, threatened, and finally confessed. I know what you think, but I can explain everything. The money, yes, I needed help, but I was going to pay you back. Please, your daughter is crying. Message 68 changed everything. Instead of Mark's frantic pleading, I heard Sarah's voice, broken and small. "Dad, please come back. Mark confessed everything." I put down my scotch and stared at the phone. This was the moment I had been waiting for, but hearing my daughter's tears made my chest ache with a pain I hadn't expected. The 74th call came at 9:43 p.m. This time, I answered. "Dad?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "Everything? What exactly did he tell you?" "About the money, about his debts, about the other women." Each word sounded like broken glass. "You were right about everything. The court cases, the lies, all of it." Through the phone, I could hear Mark in the background, his voice high and desperate. "She doesn't understand. I love her. The money doesn't matter." "I'll come back to Seattle," I said carefully, "but I'm not paying for anything. After everything that happened, the photo, the humiliation, I'm not writing any more checks." "Understood, Dad. Just, please be here. I need you. Pack your things, sweetheart. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." After I hung up, I booked the red-eye flight back to the West Coast. Outside my window, Chicago slept peacefully, unaware that 3,000 miles away, justice had finally caught up with Mark Peterson. Sometimes the best revenge is just letting someone show their true colors when the pressure gets to be too much. 3 months later, the summer heat was shimmering off the sidewalks of Chicago as I heard familiar footsteps coming up the stairs to my apartment. Through the peephole, I saw Sarah standing in the hallway with 2 worn-out suitcases, her face thin but determined. She looked more like my daughter than she had in over a year. I opened the door before she could knock. "Dad, forgive me. You were right about everything." The words came tumbling out as she fell into my arms, just like she had when she was 7 and fell off her bike. "Sweetheart, you're my daughter. We'll get through this together." I led her to the couch, the same leather couch where this nightmare had started with that video call in February. How different everything was now. The evidence folders were gone, filed away with the FBI, but Helen's photograph still watched over us from the mantel. "He took almost everything." Sarah's voice shook with exhaustion and shame. "My condo, my savings, even my grandmother's jewelry. After the wedding fell apart, he got desperate. He started forging my signature, accessing accounts I didn't even know he'd found." The television was murmuring in the background. I had been watching the evening news out of habit. Suddenly, Mark's face filled the screen, but it wasn't the polished headshot from his fake business profiles. This was a mugshot, his hair a mess, his practiced smile replaced by the empty stare of someone whose schemes had finally run out. "Mark Peterson arrested for large-scale fraud," the news anchor announced with professional calm. "Federal investigators say he targeted wealthy families through romantic relationships, stealing over $2 million from victims in multiple states." Sarah looked up at the screen, then back at me. "They called me yesterday. I'm not his only victim, am I?" Emily Davis, Jessica Lee, Megan Brown, I named the women whose pictures I had printed in that Seattle hotel room. "You weren't his first, but you will be his last." The news report continued with details that confirmed every instinct I'd had about Mark. Multiple identities, forged investment documents, a pattern of targeting successful women on dating apps, and then systematically draining their assets over a 6-month period. "Mark will pay for this. Justice will be served," I said, pulling my daughter closer. The federal investigation had moved quickly once Mark's house of cards collapsed. The evidence I had gathered during that sleepless night in February had given them their initial roadmap. But Mark's desperation after the wedding had led him to make increasingly reckless mistakes. When you build your life on lies, the truth has a way of coming out when you least expect it. "I testified before the grand jury last week," Sarah said quietly. "He's looking at 15 to 20 years. Outside, Chicago hummed with its familiar evening rhythm. Normal families were finishing dinner, helping their kids with homework, living the simple, honest lives I'd envied during my darkest moments. "What now?" Sarah asked. I looked around the apartment that had been my sanctuary through the worst crisis of my life, then at my daughter, older, wiser, scarred, but not broken. Now, we rebuild, together. Helen's photograph on the mantel seemed to smile in approval. Sometimes, protecting the people you love means making hard choices, even when they hate you for it. But love endures, the truth comes out, and justice, when it finally arrives, is sweeter than any revenge. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.